with your host, Jaden Miller.
A good day, and thank you for joining me on my podcast, Think About It with Jaden Miller. I, of course, appreciate you guys and your support of my podcast. And in this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about Queen Elizabeth and how she actually came to the throne. But before we do, I want you to check out my website at www.jadenmiller.com. Please like, share, and subscribe on my YouTube channel, and like, comment, and follow on your favorite podcast platform. You can listen to me on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Spreaker, Google Podcast, Castbox, iHeartRadio, Audrey, Podvine, Amazon Podcast, and many, many more. Last week was a week full of history. As you all know, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen of the United Kingdom and the other Commonwealth realms, the longest living and longest reigning British monarch, died at the age of 96 on September the 8th, and she died at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. As you know, upon the Queen's death, Charles, or Prince Charles as he was affectionately known, her eldest son, immediately became King of the United Kingdom and the 14 other Commonwealth realms. And so now he is titled His Royal Majesty King Charles III. Queen Elizabeth's death set in motion Operation London Bridge, a collection of plans including arrangements for her funeral, and Operation Unicorn, which set protocols for the Queen's death in Scotland. The United Kingdom is observing a national mourning period of 10 days, and the state funeral service for Queen Elizabeth II is due to be held at Westminster Abbey on September the 19th at 11 o'clock a.m. The Queen had been in good health for most of her life. Throughout 2021 and 2022, the Queen faced several health issues. In October 2021, British media reported that the Queen had begun using a walking stick during public engagements. The Queen stayed overnight in a hospital on October 20th, resulting in visits to Northern Ireland and her visit to the COP26 summit in Glasgow being canceled on health grounds. In November of last year, the Queen suffered from a sprained back and was unable to attend the 2021 National Service of Remembrance. In February 2022, during the COVID-19 pandemic in England, the Queen was one of several people at Windsor Castle to test positive for COVID-19. Her symptoms were described as mild and cold-like, with the Queen later commenting that the disease does leave one very tired and exhausted. Given the health impacts of COVID-19 and long COVID are known to be more severe among older people. Therefore, the Queen's health came into question by multiple outlets. However, the Queen was reportedly feeling well enough to resume her official duties by March the 1st. She was present at the service of Thanksgiving for Prince Philip at Westminster Abbey on the 29th of March, but was unable to attend the annual Commonwealth Day service that month or the Royal Maundy service in April. In May, the Queen missed the state opening of Parliament for the first time in 59 years. She did not attend in 1959 and 1963 as she was pregnant with Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, and Prince Edward, Earl of Wessex, respectively. In her absence, Parliament was opened by the Prince of Wales, who, of course, at the time was Prince Charles, and the Duke of Cambridge as councillors of state. The Prince of Wales, the heir apparent, gained more official responsibilities towards the end of the Queen's life and stood in for her at the state opening of Parliament. In June, the Queen did not attend the national service of Thanksgiving for her Platinum Jubilee. Official sources mentioned her discomfort at standing during the military parade celebrating her official birthday on the first day of celebrations. During the celebration, the Queen was largely confined to balcony appearances. On September 6, 2 days before her death, the Queen accepted the resignation of Boris Johnson and appointed Liz Truss to succeed him as Prime Minister at Balmoral Castle in a break with tradition. This was usually done at Buckingham Palace. On September 7th, she was scheduled to attend an online meeting of the Privy Council of the United Kingdom to swear in new ministers in Truss's government, but it was announced that the meeting had been canceled after she was advised to rest by doctors. The Queen's final public statement issued that same day was a message of condolences for the victims of the 2022 Saskatchewan stabbings, and those stabbings happened this prior week in Canada. Queen Elizabeth, of course, was a monumental figure in not only British history, but in world history as well. She became the queen in 1953 after the death of her father, King George VI. And since then, she has played a massive role in the history of the country and in many ways, as I've already mentioned, the world. The thing about Queen Elizabeth is that she was never supposed to be queen. And this is a story that has always intrigued me. Very, very much so. Her father was actually Prince Albert, and he was second in line for the throne after his elder brother, King Edward VIII, back in the 1930s. However, King Edward decided to abdicate the throne and because he wanted to marry a twice divorced American citizen named Wallis Spencer. And the British society felt that Wallis Spencer was socially and politically unacceptable as a prospective British queen back in 1936. And so what I wanted to do today is focus on a few things as it relates to Queen Elizabeth and her ascension to the role of Queen of the United Kingdom. And that's kind of to go back and give you guys a little bit of history on how this happened. All right. Back in 1936, there was a constitutional crisis in the British Empire. And it arose when King Edward VIII proposed to marry Wallis Simpson, an American socialite who was divorced from her first husband and was pursuing the divorce of her second. The marriage was opposed by the governments of the United Kingdom and the dominions of the British Commonwealth. So there were religious, legal, political, and moral objections raised. As the British monarch, King Edward was the nominal head of the Church of England, which at this time did not allow divorced people to remarry in church if their ex-spouses were still alive. Therefore, it was widely believed that Edward could not marry Simpson and remain on the throne. As a twice divorced woman, Simpson was perceived to be politically, morally, and socially unsuitable as a prospective queen consort. It was widely assumed at the time that she was driven by love of money or position rather than love for King Edward. Despite the opposition, King Edward declared that he loved Simpson and intended to marry her as soon as her second divorce was finalized. The widespread unwillingness to accept Simpson as the king's consort and Edward's refusal to give her up led to his abdication in December 1936. So, if we look back in history, this was just before World War II began. And there was a lot going on in Europe with Adolf Hitler and the Nazis really gaining steam. And, I'll talk briefly about how King Edward was seen to be a Nazi sympathizer. So he gave up his throne in December of 1936. And when you sum it all up, a lot of people believe that he gave up his throne for love. He was succeeded by his brother Albert, who became King George VI, and then Edward was given the title of Duke of Windsor and styled His Royal Highness following his abdication. And he married Simpson the following year. Now, some people question, her, and whether or not she was driven by love or money or position. Well, they remained married until his death 35 years later. So she could be criticized for being a twice divorced American woman, but maybe it's evident that her desire for King Edward was not based on finances or political positions or anything like that, but maybe she did love him. So let's go back in time a little bit. King Edward had been introduced to Wallis Simpson, an American citizen and wife of British shipping executive Ernest Aldrich Simpson, by Lady Furness. These are British royals, on the 10th of January, 1939. Now, at this time, 1931. And at this time, Edward was Prince of Wales. So he had not ascended to the throne as of yet in 1931. So that British shipping executive, Ernest Simpson, was Wallis's second husband. Her first marriage was to a United States Navy pilot, and his name was Wallis Spencer. And that divorce ended in 1927. It is generally accepted that Wallis Simpson and King Edward became lovers in 1934, while Lady Furness, who was also in a relationship with Prince Edward, soon to be King Edward, was visiting relatives in the United States. However, King Edward adamantly insisted to his father, King George V, that he was not physically intimate with Simpson and that it was inappropriate to describe her as his mistress. Edward's relationship with Simpson further weakened his poor relationship with his parents. Although King George and Queen Mary met Simpson at Buckingham Palace in 1935, they later refused to receive her. Therefore, Edward and Wallis Simpson were secretly followed by members of the Metropolitan Police Special Branch, who produced reports on the nature of their relationship and their investigations into Wallis Simpson's private life that included the pursuit of vicious gossip and the identification of a secret lover. The prospect of having an American divorcee with a questionable past having such sway over the heir apparent, meaning King Edward is about to become king, led to anxiety among government and establishment figures. King Edward succeeded his father on January 20th, 1936, after which Wallis Simpson attended more official functions as the king's guest. Despite her name appearing regularly in the court circular, the name of her husband was conspicuously absent. In the summer of that year, the king eschewed the traditional prolonged stay at Balmoral, which is, of course, one of the official residences, in favor of a holiday with Simpson in the Eastern Mediterranean that was widely covered in the American and continental European press, but not by the British press, which maintained a self-imposed silence. Nevertheless, Canadians and expatriate Britons who had access to the foreign reports were largely scandalized by the coverage. A lot going on back in 1936. By October, it was rumored in high society and abroad that Edward intended to marry Simpson as soon as she was free to do so. At the end of that month, the crisis came to a head when she filed for the divorce, and the American press announced that marriage between her and the king was imminent. The king's private secretary wrote to him on November 13th, warning, the silence in the British press on the subject of your majesty's friendship with Mrs. Simpson is not going to be maintained. Judging by the letters from British subjects living in foreign countries where the press has been outspoken, the effect will be calamitous, said his private secretary. British ministers knew that Harding had written to the king and may have helped him draft the letter. The king invited Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin to Buckingham Palace the following Monday, which would have been November 16th, and informed him that he intended to marry Wallis Simpson. Baldwin replied that such a marriage would not be acceptable to the people, stating, "The queen becomes the queen of the country. Therefore, in the choice of a queen, the voice of the people must be heard." Baldwin's view was shared by the Australian High Commissioner in London, Stanley Bruce, who was also a former Prime Minister of Australia. On the same day that Harding wrote to the king, Bruce met Harding and then wrote to Baldwin, expressing horror at the idea of a marriage between the king and Simpson. Nevertheless, the British press remained quiet on the subject until Alfred Blunt, Bishop of Bradford, gave a speech to his diocesan conference on December 1st, which alluded to the king's need of divine grace. He said, "We hope that he is aware of his need. Some of us wish that he gave more positive signs of awareness." The press took this for the first public comment by a notable person on the crisis, and it became front page news the following day. When asked about it later, however, the bishop claimed he had not heard of Simpson at the time he wrote the speech. Acting on the advice of Edward's staff, Simpson left Britain for the south of France 2 days later in an attempt to escape intense press attention. Both she and the king were devastated by the separation. At a tearful departure, the king told her, "I shall never give you up." All right, so now you have a little bit of background as to, this whole situation, concerning King Edward VIII and American divorcee Wallis Simpson. So now the opposition to the king and his marriage came from several directions. Edward's desire to modernize the monarchy and make it more accessible through which was appreciated by many in the public, it was still distrusted by the British establishment. Edward upset the aristocracy by treating their traditions and ceremonies with disdain, and many were offended by his abandonment of accepted social norms and mores. So a lot of this gossip and a lot of this whispering, against the king was, a lot of it was because so many of them disliked him based upon how he acted as king, wanting to modernize the monarchy and, not following established traditions and social norms and mores, and when we talk about social norms and mores, we're talking about him, being really upfront and outward in his affair with this married woman. So opposition to the king was really based on 3 levels: social and moral, religious and legal, and political. All right, so we talked about social, religious, and political. All right. When we talk about social, government ministers and the royal family found Wallis Simpson's background and behavior unacceptable for a potential queen. Now, I'm going to stop there for a minute because remember, we're talking about 1936, all right, which was certainly a different time. All right. Rumors and innuendo about her circulated in society. The king's mother, King Edward VIII's mother, Queen Mary, was even told that Simpson might have held some sort of sexual control over Edward. Okay. There were some that said that there must have been some sort of sadomasochistic relationship between them two, because Edward relished the contempt and bullying she bestowed on him. Police detectives following Simpson reported that while involved with Edward, she was also involved with a married car mechanic and salesman at the time. Joseph Kennedy, who was the ambassador to Great Britain, described her as a tart. And his wife, Rose Kennedy, of course, these Joseph Kennedy and Rose Kennedy are the parents of John F. Kennedy and Ted Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy, okay? And at the time, Joseph Kennedy was the ambassador to the American ambassador to the Great Britain. His wife, Rose, refused to dine with Wallis Simpson. Wallis was perceived to be pursuing Edward for his money, okay? Which, of course, he did have a lot of, being the king of England, all right, the King of Great Britain. During this time, relations between the United Kingdom and the United States were strained during the interwar years, and the majority of Britons were reluctant to accept an American as queen consort. At the time, some members of the British upper class looked down on Americans with disdain and considered them socially inferior. All right. In contrast, the American public was clearly in favor of the marriage, as was most of the American press. So we talk about social and moral as one of the reasons for opposition. You know, as a person that talks about, you know, American history, especially the American Revolution and the breaking away of the United States, or initially the 13 original colonies from Great Britain. It's always fascinating to me that, you know, to read or to hear about how, you know, back during this time in the 1930s, the interwar years between World War I and World War II, that you still had members of the British upper class that looked down their nose at Americans and considered them socially inferior, you know, which always brings to mind to me that, you know, the United States, this little bitty tiny group of 13 disorganized colonies that came together to form a nation, and could not move forward in whooping Great Britain without the assistance of France, you know, are looked down upon, when in essence, if we put this in urban or street terms, that, I mean, these Americans, this ragtag group of individuals, okay, you know, that came together to fight because they were being mistreated by Great Britain, you know, by not only King George III, but Parliament. You know, I like to lump those two together because remember, the monarchy at the time had little power. You know, it was the Parliament, you know, that had the power and that allowed King George III to act the way that he did. I think sometimes that's lost on people, but, you know, you had this ragtag group of individuals, these colonists, that whooped the baddest military in the world, yet they still have the nerve to look down on Americans, you know. I always find that fascinating. So as I mentioned, there were three oppositions. There was social and moral, which I just talked about. Then there was religious. So in Edward's lifetime, the Church of England forbade the remarriage of divorced people in church while a former spouse was still living. The monarch was required by law to be in communion with the Church of England and was its nominal head or supreme governor. In 1935, the Church of England reaffirmed that in no circumstances can Christian men or women remarry during the lifetime of a wife or a husband. The Archbishop of Canterbury held that the king, as the head of the Church of England, could not marry a divorcee. If Edward married Wallis Spencer, a divorcee who would soon have two living ex-husbands, in a civil ceremony, it would directly conflict with church teaching and his role as the church's ex officio head. Wallis's first divorce was not recognized by the Church of England, and if challenged in the English courts, might not have been recognized under English law. At the time, the church and English law considered adultery to be the only grounds for divorce. Consequently, under this agreement, her second marriage, as well as her marriage to Edward, would be considered bigamous and invalid. The Matrimonial Causes Act of 1937, which was passed shortly after Edward and Wallis's marriage, would allow for numerous other divorce justifications at the legal level. All right. And then finally, and I'm going to talk about the religious one in just a second, but then there's the political one. King Edward had a mouth on him. And when he visited depressed mining villages in Wales, his comment that something must be done, you know, about the depressed mining villages led to concerns among elected politicians that he would interfere in political matters traditionally avoided by constitutional monarchs. And again, for those of you that don't understand how the British system is set up, the Queen or the king now, in the case of King Charles III, they are the head of state, which is mainly a ceremonial position. The prime minister of Great Britain is the head of government. Okay, they handle all the political things and the bureaucracy that goes on in government, not the Queen or the king, in this case, King Edward. And so their role is not to interfere in political matters. Okay, it's a largely ceremonial position, but yet you have King Edward making these comments. And although King Edward's comments made him popular in Wales, he became extremely unpopular with the public in Scotland, following his refusal to open up a new wing of Aberdeen Royal Infirmary, saying he could not do so because he was in mourning for his father. So just so much, in terms of things that he said. I mean, as Prince of Wales, he publicly referred to Labour County councillors as cranks and made speeches counter to government policy. So many different things that at the time, those that were elected politicians in Great Britain disdained the fact that he was making these comments. Members of the British government became further dismayed by the proposed marriage after being told that Wallis Simpson was an agent of Nazi Germany. The Foreign Office obtained leaked dispatches from the German Reich's ambassador to the United Kingdom, which revealed his strong view that opposition to the marriage was motivated by the wish to defeat those German forces which had been working through Mrs. Simpson. It was rumored that Simpson had access to confidential government papers sent to King Edward, which he left unguarded. When Edward was abdicating, the personal protection officers guarding Simpson in exile sent reports to Downing Street suggesting that she might fit, or she might, be more, available to Germany during this time. That she would sell them or give them state secrets during this time. So King Edward, became very, very unpopular based upon his relationship with Wallis Simpson. So they did get married, but they got married after he abdicated. Okay, so his brother, King George VI, granted King Edward, who was now formally King Edward VIII, granted his elder brother the title of Duke of Windsor with the style His Royal Highness. And this occurred on December 12, 1936. On May 3rd the following year, the Simpson divorce was made final. The case was handled quietly, and was barely featured in some newspapers. The Times of Great Britain printed a single sentence below a separate and seemingly unconnected report announcing the Duke's departure from Austria. On June 3rd, 1937, formerly King Edward, now the deposed, or actually I shouldn't say deposed, the now abdicated King Edward, married Wallis Simpson, and she became the Duchess of Windsor. But much to Edward's disgust, George VI issued letters patent that denied her the style of Her Royal Highness. So, all of these titles and all of this royalty and stuff is a little bit confusing, but in other words, King Edward, I keep calling him King Edward. He was King Edward, but now he's he's now the Duke of Windsor. He felt slighted that his younger brother, who is now king, denied his now wife the title Her Royal Highness. So now you have King George VI, who is starting to get very busy. And he's starting to get very busy because Germany is starting to really move towards occupying the whole of Europe. In October of 1937, now King Edward and Wallis Simpson visited Germany against the advice of the British government and met Hitler, at one of his retreats. And then during the visit, King Edward, or now Duke of Windsor, because as I mentioned, he's abdicated his throne, he now gives full Nazi salutes. Okay, full Nazi salutes. In 1937, the Duke wrote that Hitler persuaded him it was in Britain's interest and in Europe's too that Germany be encouraged to strike east and smash communism forever. Edward thought that the Nazis who are gaining this steam, that are now starting to really march ahead in Europe for negative reasons, he felt that we could be fence sitters while the Nazis and the communists slug it out. Of course, we know that wasn't the case. So after the outbreak of World War II in September 1939, Edward was assigned to the British military mission in France. And in 1940, the German ambassador in The Hague claimed that Edward had leaked the Allied war plans for the defense of Belgium. When Germany invaded the north of France in May 1940, the Duke and Duchess fled to Lisbon. It's said that, the Duke of Windsor was well known to be pro-Nazi, and that Winston Churchill threatened him with court-martial if he did not return to British soil. He was appointed governor of the Bahamas in 1940. And it is said that he stated after the war is over and Hitler will crush the Americans, we'll take over. Will take over? The British don't want me as their king, but I'll be back as their leader. He was reported as saying that it would be a tragic thing for the world if Hitler was overthrown. So you had all of these different comments that are associated with King Edward, or the Duke of Windsor now. And this reinforced the belief of many that he held Nazi sympathies, and the effect of the abdication of 1936 was to force off the throne a man with extreme political opinions. All right. So in essence, what is believed is that this was a great thing, that circumstances that even maybe the universe caused, this relationship between Wallis Simpson and King Edward. And that because of the political, because of the religious, because of the social reasons for why King Edward was now unfit to be king, that those things are certainly part of the reason why it was a great thing that he did abdicate, that there was sort of a forcing of him to leave because this man had Nazi sympathies. All right. And so when his brother, King George VI, or his name was Prince Albert, but he became King George VI, this is now seen as a great thing because he becomes king, and his daughter, his firstborn daughter, is now set up to become the queen after his death. King George VI died at a relatively young age. His rule was not smooth. He had to guide the country through World War II and a number of political tensions in the United Kingdom. He died of coronary thrombosis in 1952 after suffering from lung cancer and various other illnesses for quite some time. And if I'm not mistaken, he died at the age of 56. And so Elizabeth, now Queen Elizabeth, the one who just passed on at the age of 96 and who spent over 70 years as the leader of the United Kingdom, all right, she was never, ever supposed to be queen. It's only because her uncle, King Edward VIII, fell in love with a divorced woman, and then insisted that his love for her was so strong that he gave up his throne so that he could be with the woman that he loved for 35 years. Some people see this as a great love story. Some people see this as absolutely foolish, that he would have this affair with this woman who was having, at least at the time, people were saying that, she was having an affair, while she was having an affair, And so, when her father, Queen Elizabeth's father, became king, and again, he was never supposed to be king. He was satisfied being prince. Never thought he would be king, okay? So these things happen, and life throws us, a curveball. And so she became the Queen of England at the young age of 25 years old. She had already been married to Prince Philip. They had married shortly before she became queen. And she was in Kenya when her father passed, and she was named Queen of England. And so, or she was named Queen of Great Britain, of course, its territories. And so that's really the story of Queen Elizabeth and how she became queen. I think another real good footnote to mention is, the whole circumstances around the abdication and, the whole, suspense around, the divorcee and the divorce of Wallis Simpson and the affairs and that kind of thing, how it's so different that, in the 1990s, all right, a mere 60 something years later, how those same mores and those same politics and those same religious beliefs, have changed. So you have Queen Elizabeth, who is sitting on the throne, who is now dealing with her own son, Prince Charles, all right, who married Lady Diana, the Princess of Wales, and never truly loved her, but loved his current wife, Camilla. And during their entire marriage, his entire marriage to Diana, the mother of Prince Harry and Prince William. So society has changed so much. So you have, Prince Charles, who is having this long-term 30-something year affair with, Camilla, his girlfriend. He's, some say that, that was his best friend. That's the only woman he truly loved. But that, over those years after, his wife, the Princess of Wales, Diana, after she, divorces him, and then, she's involved in another relationship and then unfortunately dies, he's divorced. He had affairs, or at least one affair that we know of, and yet he's still able to ascend to the throne. It's just that difference of 60 some odd years, and how that makes a big difference in how people have just changed, So Prince Charles is now King Charles III, a divorced king, who is married to a divorced woman who now becomes queen consort. So anyway, just really, really fascinating, and I thought I would share that with you all. It's still really, really sad that we see the death of Queen Elizabeth, who had such a tremendous impact on history. And for some, that was a great history, 70 plus years on the throne, died at the age of 96. She was married for over 70 years to Prince Philip, who became the Duke of Windsor. An amazing love story between the two, an amazing history of, her, seeing 15 prime ministers and 13 American presidents and so much more, and how she traveled to many, many different places, and how she upheld her role with such dignity. Of course, not without scandal. Of course, there's lots of scandal. There's Lady Diana, and then there's Prince Harry, and and then of course there's Prince Charles, and then there's her other son, Prince Andrew, and his whole Jeffrey Epstein, and soliciting these young girls and all that kind of stuff. All that is part of her history as well. And so again, still saddened by the death of Queen Elizabeth, who was a major figure on the world stage. At a later time, I want to talk a little bit more about Queen Elizabeth and her rule, and how there are many people, many countries, and in history, many feel as though her rule was one of a continued colonialism, which the British Empire has been known to have done. How many the tons and tons of millions of people who were negatively impacted by her rule, and the rule of her ancestors, and then also some people feel as though she plundered, well, not she by herself, but her crown, the British monarchy, how they plundered tons and tons of money and riches from India and a lot of the African countries, and even more. So that's a subject for another time. I thank you guys for listening. Just wanted to pay homage to a great woman in history, Queen Elizabeth II, and to talk a little bit about how she actually became queen, the queen that was never supposed to be queen. So again, check out my website at www.jadenmiller.com, and please like, share, and subscribe on my YouTube channel, and like, comment, and follow on your favorite podcast platform. All right, this is Think About It with Jaden Miller. Thank you very much for your attention, and I appreciate you guys. I'll look forward to the next episode, which will come up pretty soon. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Think About It with Jaden Miller. Don't forget to like and subscribe to his YouTube channel, and like and follow on your favorite podcast platform.